In this video, I'm going to be talking about the fear of engulfment. We'll be looking at it through the clinical lens and then also looking at it through the schizoid functioning lens. Clinical interpretation and observable behavior are not always the same thing. This video aims to separate what clinicians accurately observed from the explanations that were attached to those observations. I'm not going to read every box word for word, so you may want to take a minute to orientate yourself with the slide, but I will be going through each box one by one and adding some context to it. So we're going to start with the beige box. This looks at what was accurately observed. What was observed clinically often reflected recognizable schizoid patterns, so inward orientation appeared consistently across presentations, reduced emotional signaling was commonly observed, and preference for solitude, reliance on abstraction, and limited relational urgency was frequently documented. The observations themselves were often quite accurate, but the interpretation of these patterns may be a little restrictive to cover the whole of the schizoid spectrum. So my point in making this video is not to dispute the fear of engulfment or the clinical observations that were made, but to suggest that it may not cover and represent everybody on the schizoid spectrum, and this will become clearer as we go on. We'll now move over to the blue box. This looks at how it was interpreted. The interpretive framework increasingly moved towards conflict-based explanations. This is mainly because in clinical settings, the people that are coming forth are people who are experiencing significant challenges, distress, or discomfort with their condition. Through clinical observations, distance became associated with defense and avoidance. Withdrawal became linked to hidden dependency and relational fear, and reduced emotional expression was often interpreted as emptiness or deprivation. And the internal life of the schizoid was framed as compensation for unmet attachment needs. Over time, these interpretations became generalized across different schizoid presentations. As I was alluding to earlier, this doesn't mean that fear-based dynamics never existed. For some individuals, engulfment anxiety, intrusion sensitivity, and dependency conflict may play a central part of their lives, particularly within trauma-linked configurations and secondary schizoid structures. However, the argument is not that these experiences are false, but that they may not apply universally across the schizoid spectrum. We will now go over to the green box. This looks at the resulting clinical framing. Conflict-based explanations increasingly became treated as primary or universal. So observable patterns remained relatively consistent and interpretive assumptions expanded around those patterns. Over time, distance itself became increasingly pathologized. And so neutrality could be seen as something that is suspicious or emotionally absent, rather than seen as potentially a form of functioning. This reframing is alluding to the fact that different schizoid configurations may operate through different internal structures. For example, with some primary schizoid organizations or developmental paths, Inward orientation can function less as a defensive retreat and more as a stable internal structuring and regulation process. We'll go over to the purple box. This is linked to what I was saying before, is that in clinical settings where a lot of the schizoid patterning data was derived from, that interpretations over time became generalized across all schizoid functioning, and this is where we have the term like schizoid personality disorder emerging from clinical settings, which has later been reframed by Helena Greenberg as schizoid adaptations. So there has been some move to look at it differently. However, its origins are very much coming from a pathologized perspective. Similar outward behaviors don't always emerge from the same internal dynamics. Two individuals may appear similarly withdrawn externally, however, internally, the underlying structure may be very different. For some people, fear, conflict, and attachment disruption can remain central, whilst for others, regulation, pacing, and internal organization may be more at the forefront. So, what I'm moving towards here is when we look at fear of engulfment, is that the interpretation of schizoid functioning should remain differentiated rather than universalized, so that we can account for all the different developmental paths and the different contributory factors and the different ways that it manifests in people across the schizoid spectrum. At the bottom of the screen, we have observation, interpretation, and generalization. It's important when we talk about the fear of engulfment to look at what fear actually means in schizoid functioning, because many schizoid individuals don't consciously experience terror, panic, or catastrophic anxiety. Instead, they may notice during interactions that it carries a high internal cost. It may be draining. Over time, we could find that our coherence diminishes when we're under too much strain or social pressure. We become withdrawn. We may be distancing ourselves within ourselves from our emotions or from others, and we may need distance in order to stay stable and coherent and balanced. Although some people are consciously experiencing fear, this doesn't necessarily apply to all of the schizoid spectrum, especially in people who are significantly distant from their own emotions. They're more likely to experience pressure, intensity, aversion, or weight, or draininess. So fear doesn't necessarily apply evenly across the spectrum. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next slide now. So the focus is shifting away from emotional conflict towards internal organization, and from the defensive interpretation towards regulatory function. I must make the point that I'm not saying that schizoid individuals do not experience some level of defense, especially depending on the path through which they've developed and the contributing factors. However, as I said before, I want to look at how fear of engulfment can actually be seen differently when looking at what is actually being served and preserved. We'll start off with the green box. This looks at fear and overload. So relational input may sometimes accumulate beyond our internal processing capacity, and the pressure may not always be experienced as fear of people themselves. Instead, Sustained input and continuous engagement may begin building internal load. Our processing time may become reduced as interaction continues, and internal coherence and pacing may gradually weaken. So distancing functions as a way of reducing load and restoring organization. And this may be experienced as trying to continue processing whilst new input continues to arrive faster than can be integrated. The pink box looks at intimacy versus pacing disruption. So internal pacing is important to stable schizoid functioning, which means that we need to do things with our own timing and we need to preserve our autonomy. So the issue with relationships is not solely about closeness. It's not about closeness alone. It's more about how much we can manage. So pressure may increase during interactions and they can become emotionally dense or continuously demanding, which forces us into external pacing, which can override our internal timing. And so our internal sequencing might become harder to maintain. So by creating space in relationships, it allows our processing to slow down and for our thoughts to connect fully. So this can be experienced as losing our internal continuity whilst trying to remain socially present. And we'll go to the purple box. This looks at withdrawal versus regulation. So within the structural model of schizoid functioning, withdrawal may function less as avoidance and more as stabilization. So reducing contact can help to lower input load and input pressure, and distance can help to restore our pacing and preserve our internal organization. So withdrawal can therefore support our continued functioning. When a person is withdrawn or dissociated or distant, it can be for a deeper internal purpose. This doesn't mean that withdrawal is always going to be healthy, and it doesn't mean that it's not going to cause challenges, and it doesn't mean that when we're interacting with the external world, it doesn't cause problems, because it can be problematic. However, the point that I'm making is about the functional necessity of creating distance, whether it's distance from our own emotions, whether it's distance from others, or just physical distance and controlling our environment to suit our needs and our internal pacing. We'll go to the yellow box now. This is concerned with threat versus disruption. When we talk about fear of engulfment, it's often about feeling threatened. However, looking through the functional lens, for some individuals, it can be more about not wanting disruption. Not wanting disruption is more the central issue than any sort of conscious fear. Naturally, when we involve with other people, it can disrupt our functioning. It can mean that we are not operating in tune with our own internal pacing and our own internal timing. And it can mean that we have to attend externally a lot more, and because we're in our internal references internal, the external referring externally to another person can cause strain. From the outside, this can look like anxiety or defensive withdrawal. However, internally, subjective fear is not always the primary driver. For some individuals, fear and intrusion and anxiety may be a critical factor, particularly within, as I said before, trauma-linked configurations and attachment injury variants. The argument's not that fear never exists. The argument is that it doesn't universally explain all schizoid functioning. Now we'll go over to the blue box. This looks at how distance restores clarity. This is something I have talked about in past videos. I am touching on some previously covered topics here to reinforce the point, and so we can look at how it relates to the fear of engulfment. As input reduces and our internal system is able to function with less input, this allows space for our pacing to slow down and processing to reconnect. What's important about understanding the role of distance is that distance is not necessarily about social rejection. In some cases, it may be linked to it. However, it may also support our restoration, our regulation, and our clarity. At the bottom, we see the strip: external demand, internal disruption, and distance regulation, clarity restored. That's quite self-explanatory, and really it's just making the point that rather than fear of engulfment, there's a need to reduce external demand. And so withdrawing in relationships or withdrawing socially can be linked to lowering external demand, because external demand can cause internal disruption to our functioning. And so through distance, we can regain clarity. As I said before, this can be distance from our own emotions, distance from our thoughts, distance from other people, or distance from our physical surroundings. Misunderstanding occurs when all schizoid withdrawal is automatically interpreted through fear and defense, because some forms of distancing may instead function as regulation to prevent overload. So we'll move on to the last slide now. What we see here is on the left we have the psychoanalytic interpretation, and on the right we have the structural recognition, which is the functional role. We have distance as avoidance on the left, and then seen through another lens, distance as regulation, flash effect as emptiness, and then also being emotional filtering, withdrawal as defense, which on the other hand can be helpful for pacing and input reduction, hidden longing, and this can be translated as reduced relational priority. Developmental arrest can be also interpreted as stable internal orientation. So the behavior is the same, but the interpretive framework lens is different. In particular, when we look at relationships with a hidden longing, this is really going to differ across the spectrum depending on when a person has become withdrawn, if it's before any relational attachment occurred or afterwards. And also when there is conflict between wanting and not wanting relationships, or longing that's unfulfilled, many schizoid individuals will take care of their relational needs in different ways, like psychologically, through fantasy, or through other means. Also, it's not impossible for schizoid individuals to engage in relationships, and depending on the configuration, for example, if someone is very emotionally detached, there are some schizoid individuals who have no relational longing, or just want to engage in relationships of a psychological, intellectual nature, or relationships that serve a structured purpose and exchange. Then there are other individuals who have more emotional sensitivity, who are going to be very, very selective about relationships, and there might just be a tiny percentage of people who they feel safe enough to form a relationship with. So it's going to vary a lot from individual to individual. So the inner conflict that is linked to fear of engulfment is not universal across the schizoid spectrum. I hope that looking at the fear of engulfment through this structured lens, looking at it in terms of function, looking at it in terms of the variances across the schizoid spectrum, and how fear may or may not be a critical issue for individuals with schizoid functioning, that we can expand our view of schizoid patterning, because I think that there is a lot more going on beneath the surface that isn't accounted for, and it's important to recognize the challenges, but also not to pathologize schizoid patterning per se, because there are variations. And that's it for today.